My name is Madison, and I am 27 years old. It was my birthday, the kind of evening that looks perfect from the outside and rotten once you step inside it. A small family gathering in my parents' dining room with warm lights, polished glasses, and smiles that never quite reached anyone's eyes. I stood there, wrapped in a dress that cost more than my rent, feeling the heavy humidity of Charleston pressing against the windows of our historic estate. $10,000 had been poured into this single legacy gala to celebrate a family name that felt like a lead weight in my stomach. Everything was sparkling, but beneath the surface, I could already smell the decay. What? Welcome to Narratives by Nora Channel. I'm behind the wheel today, and as the miles go by, I'm reflecting on how easy it is to polish a surface while ignoring the rot underneath. Where are you listening from, and what's the time? I'll check your comments as soon as I pull over. For now, let's head back to Madison's family. Abigail did not just walk into a room. She colonized it. She arrived 40 minutes late, the click of her designer heels echoing like gunfire against the marble floors of the foyer. She looked radiant, or at least, that is what the guests whispered, her confidence draped over her shoulders like an expensive mink. When she finally reached me, her hug was brief and formal. The scent of her perfume, sharp, cloying, and expensive, stung my nose. Her smile was thin, a mere formality, before the execution began. Dinner was a grand performance of clinking silver and empty laughter. My parents, Tiffany and Gregory, held court at the center of the table. They discussed real estate, country club politics, and social hierarchies, as if I were not sitting right there. They talked about work, about the neighbors, about anything and everything, except the daughter whose birth they were ostensibly celebrating. I sat in the shadow of their expectations, a silent ghost at my own feast, nursing a glass of wine that tasted like ash. Then Abigail cleared her throat. The table went silent in that heavy, pressurized way that always precedes a strike. She did not look at me with anger. It was worse than that. Her gaze was clinical, practiced, and cold. She reached into her bag and pulled out a manila folder, sliding it across the pristine, white linen tablecloth, until it tapped against my plate. On my birthday, in front of the people who were supposed to be my inner circle, my sister delivered the verdict. "Madison," she said, her voice projecting clearly for the guests to hear, "we are ashamed that you use our last name." The words landed like a physical blow, sudden and public. For a heartbeat, I thought I had misheard her, that my brain was trying to protect me by twisting the sound. But the silence that followed was absolute. Abigail went on, her tone calm and superior, explaining how my low-class NGO work was cheapening the brand and tarnishing the Henderson legacy. She demanded that I sign the documents in the folder, a formal agreement to cease using the family name in my professional life. I looked at my mother, Tiffany. She did not flinch. She just nodded slowly, her lips pressed together in a line of righteous approval. My father, Gregory, looked at Abigail with the same proud expression he used to give her when she won equestrian awards, or landed a spot on a socialite magazine cover. In this house, image was a god, and they were more than willing to sacrifice their own child on its altar. They had spent decades polishing the outside of the family name, while the human beings carrying it were hollowed out. Their love was not a gift, it was a subscription, and they had decided I was no longer worth the cost. I did not cry. I did not ask why. I just sat there, feeling the cold condensation of the wine glass seeping into my palm. I looked at the stem, slick between my fingers, and I did not see a family gathering anymore. I saw a balance sheet. For 27 years, I had been the silent investor in their version of family, footing the emotional bill, while they spent my dignity like pocket change. I looked up, not with tears, but with a clarity so sharp it felt like ice in my veins. This was not a birthday dinner. It was a business transaction, and I was done being the product. The room seemed to hold its breath. Abigail was leaning forward, her eyes bright with the expectation of my collapse. She wanted the performance. She wanted the sobbing apology, or the frantic defense of my low-class life. But anger was not loud this time. It was clinical. I realized that for my entire life, I had been a prisoner in a cell without bars. You spend so long camouflaging your soul to avoid being a target that you forget the door has been open the whole time. My silence had not been weakness. It was a survival mechanism that I no longer needed. I watched my father's hand rest on his wine glass, his wedding ring catching the light. He looked so satisfied, so righteous in his pride for the daughter who was actively disowning the other. My compassion had been a luxury they had overdrafted for years, and tonight, I was finally closing the account. I looked at the manila folder Abigail had slid toward me. It was filled with legal jargon intended to strip me of my identity, to protect their social standing. They were not shocked by what they had done. They were simply waiting for me to play my role as the sacrificial lamb. But the script had changed. I reached out, my hand steady, and slowly pushed the folder back toward the center of the table. I did not say a word. I did not need to. I just looked at Abigail, then at my mother, and finally at my father. I saw the confusion begin to flicker in Gregory's eyes, replacing that smug pride. They were shocked that I had stopped playing along. I had spent a lifetime cleaning up their emotional messes and apologizing for the crime of existing. But as the birthday candles burned low, I made a silent, cold decision. I would never fix a single thing for them again. I took a sip of my wine, letting the silence stretch until it became a physical weight in the room. I was no longer Madison the burden or Madison the disappointment. I was an observer watching a group of strangers perform a play I had already walked out of. Inside me, a different kind of sunrise was glowing, the kind made of facts, numbers, and quiet retribution. I was 27 years old, and for the first time in my life, I was no longer a Henderson. I was finally myself. While they stared at me, waiting for a signature that would never come, my mind drifted back to the real foundation of this family, the parts they had conveniently edited out of their polished narrative. 4 years ago, when the grandfather who built this estate passed away, the house did not just feel empty. It felt like a collapsing business. My mother and Abigail were too busy auditing the jewelry collection to notice that Grandma Eleanor was drowning in her own grief. They viewed her sorrow as an operational delay, an inconvenience that interfered with their social calendar. I was the only one who stepped in to manage the emotional liquidation. While Abigail was in New York, spending $3,000 on a dress for a gala she was not even invited to, I was in Charleston, carrying heavy bags of groceries up the steep, historic stairs of this very estate. I spent my weekends scrubbed in the dirt of Eleanor's garden, fixing the small things that broke the leaky faucets, the jammed window frames, the silences that stretched too long. I did not ask for praise. I did not post it on social media. I treated my care for her as a private equity, a silent investment in the only person in this family who actually possessed a soul. I remember one specific night, 3 months after the funeral. Eleanor had been sitting in the dark of the library for hours, clutching a photo of grandfather. I sat on the floor beside her for 4 hours, just listening. I heard stories about the struggle before the success, about the times they had nothing but their name and each other. She told me that a name is like a lighthouse. It is meant to guide people home, not to blind them with ego. When my parents finally showed up that weekend, they did not ask how she was. Gregory complained that the lawn had not been manicured to his standards, and Tiffany told me I looked tired and unkempt, and that I was becoming a depressing burden on the family's energy. They saw my service as a weakness, a lack of ambition. To them, if you were not projecting power, you were losing it. They had no idea that while they were busy polishing the silver, I was the one holding the walls together. I had been the silent foundation of the Henderson name for my entire adult life, providing the emotional labor they were too bankrupt to afford. I had balanced their books of neglect with my own quiet resilience, expecting nothing in return. But as I sat at that gala table, looking at the parents who called my sacrifice a burden, I realized that my empathy was no longer an open credit line they could exploit. I was done being their unpaid emotional consultant. If they wanted to see what happened when the foundation walked away, I was more than happy to show them the collapse. The silence I left in that dining room was more than a lack of words. It was a cessation of service. I went dark. I stopped answering the phone, stopped checking the group chats, and stopped being the emotional buffer they had used to regulate their own egos for decades. My family did not handle the lack of data well. Within 48 hours, the confusion at the gala table had curdled into a frantic, toxic escalation. I sat in my studio apartment, watching my phone buzz on the desk like a dying insect. I did not answer a single one. I simply went back to my spreadsheets. I watched the notifications pile up like overdue invoices. First, it was Tiffany. Her voice on the recording was sharp, vibrating with the indignation of a manager who had just lost their most reliable, unpaid employee. "Madison, you are being incredibly selfish," she snapped into the digital void. "Abigail has worked so hard on this legacy gala, and you have ruined her entire month with this dramatic tantrum. Call me immediately and fix this mess." I did not fix it. I audited it instead. I listened to Gregory's message next. He did not sound like a father. He sounded like a debt collector whose collateral had suddenly vanished into thin air. "You have forgotten who raised you," he said, his voice a low, threatening rumble. "We provided for you for 18 years, and this is the respect we get? You are a Henderson, Madison. Act like one." But I was not a Henderson anymore. I was a free agent. I was finally seeing the Henderson name for what it really was, a gilded shackle. It was a brand they expected me to maintain while they profited from my invisibility. They were not worried about my well-being or the pain Abigail had caused. They were worried about the optics of a fractured front. They had bankrupted my patience, and for the first time, they were the ones facing the deficit. Then came Abigail's move. She did not call. She used her own medium, social media. I opened my feed to see the official photos from the gala. There she was, standing between my parents, all of them glowing under the crystal chandeliers of the estate. I noticed the composition of the main shot immediately. I had been standing right next to Gregory, but in the version Abigail posted for her 5,000 followers, I had been surgically removed. She had cropped the photo so tightly that only the edge of my sleeve remained a stray thread in her perfect narrative. She was trying to erase me, to liquidate my existence from the Henderson portfolio. It was a predictable maneuver, a classic attempt to devalue an asset she could no longer control. But as I looked at that cropped photo, I did not feel the old sting of exclusion. I felt the relief of a clean break. I was not a footnote in her story anymore. I was a ghost haunting her balance sheet. Anger was not loud this time. It was clinical. They thought they were punishing me with erasure, but they did not realize I had already initiated a hostile takeover of my own life. While my family was busy editing me out of their social media presence, I was busy auditing their reality. I did not call a therapist to process the shame they tried to hand me. I called Walter. He had been Grandma Eleanor's personal attorney for over 30 years, the kind of man who dealt exclusively in hard facts and ironclad contracts. We met in his office downtown, a room that smelled like old paper, mahogany, and justice. I had been quietly feeding Walter documents for months, flagging suspicious entries I'd seen while helping Grandma Eleanor with her mail, but Abigail's latest blunder at the gala provided the final piece of the puzzle we needed to close the net in just 48 hours. We were not there to talk about hurt feelings. We were there to perform a forensic audit on the Henderson Legacy Trust. This trust was valued at $3,500,000, established by my grandfather to ensure the family's long-term stability. As Walter spread the ledgers across his desk, I did not feel a sense of family pride. I felt the cold, sharp focus of a predator closing in on its prey. My compassion had been a luxury they had overdrafted for years, and now it was time for the final settlement. The lethal discovery did not come with a shout. It arrived with a quiet, devastating click of a pen against paper. As we traced the withdrawal history from the last 3 years, the rot beneath the Henderson name became undeniable. Abigail had not just been living a socialite life on her own merit. She had been siphoning funds massive, systematic amounts. We identified over $1,200,000 that had been drained from the trust to pay for her New York shopping sprees, her designer wardrobe, and the mounting personal debts she had accrued, while maintaining her golden child facade. But that was not the kill shot. The kill shot was the forgery. To bypass the dual authorization required for large transfers, Abigail had forged my signature on over 40 separate internal documents. I looked at the copies of the wire transfers, my name written in her familiar, loopy cursive, a clumsy attempt to mimic my handwriting. It was a blatant criminal act. This was not a family disagreement anymore. It was a felony disguised as an inheritance dispute. Walter looked at me over his spectacles, his expression as clinical as my own. "The evidence is steel-clad, Madison," he said. "She did not think you would ever look. She assumed your silence was a permanent asset she could exploit." I did not feel shock. I felt the absolute satisfaction of a balanced ledger. This was not revenge. It was accounting. Abigail had spent 3 years treating my identity like her personal credit line, and my parents had stood by and cheered for the success she had bought with my stolen legacy. "I want the paperwork ready by tomorrow," I told Walter, my voice calm and lethal. "We are calling a final family meeting at the estate. It is time to show them what the Henderson name actually costs when you stop paying the bills." I left the office and stepped into the humid Charleston air, feeling more powerful than I ever had as a Henderson. Inside my bag, the manila folder did not feel heavy anymore. It felt like a different kind of sunrise, the kind made of facts, numbers, and quiet retribution. I walked back into that historic estate 48 hours later. Grandma Eleanor met us at the door, her expression unreadable. She didn't lead us to the drawing room where the staff might overhear. Instead, she motioned toward the heavy oak doors of grandfather's private study, a soundproof sanctuary where the Henderson family's darkest secrets were always managed behind closed doors. The air inside was thick with the scent of old leather, cigar smoke, and imminent judgment. My parents were already there, seated like a tribunal, with Abigail standing at the center of the room, looking ready to deliver the final sentencing. They thought this meeting was about my rehabilitation, an opportunity for me to apologize for the embarrassment I had caused at the gala. Abigail did not even wait for me to sit. She began her lecture immediately, her voice rising in that rehearsed, superior tone, talking about family unity and the weight of our name. Then it happened. The legs of a chair scraped against the hardwood floor, with a sound like a blade being sharpened. Grandma Eleanor stood up. The room went so silent that the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall sounded like a hammer. Abigail froze, her mouth half open. As Eleanor walked toward her with a stillness that was not weakness, it was a patience that had finally been exhausted. Eleanor looked at my sister, her eyes sharp and clear, and spoke only 2 words. Sit down. They were not loud, but they did not need to be. Authority does not shout when it knows it will be obeyed. Abigail's face drained of color, her confident posture collapsing as she sank back into her seat. Eleanor did not look at her again. She turned to my parents and produced the audit results Walter had prepared. She did not just reveal a secret, she exposed a crime. She laid out the evidence of how Abigail had systematically siphoned more than $1,200,000 from the $3,500,000 legacy trust. My father's proud expression did not just waver, it turned to absolute ash. As he looked at the forged signatures Abigail had used to steal Madison's future, to pay for her own vanity. Eleanor looked at Abigail, her voice as cold as the legal documents on the table. The trust has a morality provision, Abigail. By forging Madison's signature to steal over $1 million, you have legally forfeited your entire interest in this legacy. She turned to me, her gaze softening. As the surviving grantor, I am exercising my power of appointment. Madison, the remains of this trust are now yours to direct. Every cent. Walter stepped forward, placing a final document in front of Abigail. The forensic audit is ready for the district attorney, Abigail. You have exactly 10 minutes to sign these forfeiture papers and agree to a permanent non-disclosure agreement. You can leave Charleston tonight with your freedom, or you can leave in handcuffs. Choose now. Abigail's hand shook as she realized the golden cage had finally locked from the outside. Eleanor looked at me, and for the first time, I saw the silent regret in her eyes. She admitted she had watched this family for decades, watching pride turn into cruelty and standards turn into weapons. She told them she had waited for me to see my own worth before she struck, because a rescue only works if the person wants to be saved. She took my hand, her voice thick with a lifetime of observation. I waited because I needed you to see them for who they really are, Madison. And more importantly, I needed you to find the strength to walk away on your own. I couldn't give you a legacy if you didn't have the iron in your soul to protect it. Now, the lesson is over. Madison, she whispered, her hand resting on my shoulder. I am proud of the person you became, while nobody was looking. The power had shifted irrevocably. My mother looked small and ashamed, and my father could not meet my gaze. I didn't feel the urge to gloat or scream. I simply looked at my parents with a calm, clinical detachment. I didn't do this to destroy you, I said quietly. I did this to protect what's left of our integrity. You taught me that image is everything. I'm just finally making sure the reality matches the portrait. Their silence was the only admission of guilt I needed. I stepped out into the cool night air, the heavy iron gates of the estate swinging shut behind me with a final echoing clang. I did not look back. In my bag was the documentation that changed everything. The Henderson Legacy Trust, all $3,500,000 of it, was no longer a trophy for Abigail or a shield for my parents' vanity. With the authority Grandma Eleanor had transferred to me, I had Walter finalize the paperwork. Every cent was being diverted to my established ocean conservation NGO through a structured charitable lead trust. It was a sophisticated financial move that ensured the Henderson fortune would finally serve a purpose greater than vanity, while permanently shielding it from the reach of those who had nearly bled it dry. This wasn't just a donation. It was a hostile takeover of the family's legacy for the sake of the planet. This was the justice of the sower. I was not interested in their destruction. I was focused on my creation. I was turning their ash into the soil for a better future. I have come to realize that a last name is just a collection of letters until you decide what it means. For years, I let them use mine as a shackle, but as I stood by the harbor watching the moonlight dance on the water, I knew I had redefined it on my own terms. If you find yourself in a similar situation, if you are the one carrying groceries while they shop for status, the one fixing faucets while they polish their image, know that you are the silent foundation, but you do not have to be the floor they walk on. You spend so long trying to earn love that was always conditional, but once you stop paying for that subscription, you finally realize how rich you actually are. To those of you listening who have always felt like the outsider or the black sheep, this is my letter to you. I know the ache of being invisible at your own dinner table. I know the weight of shame that is not yours to carry. But remember, forgiveness is not a requirement for healing, and cutting toxic ties is not an act of cruelty, it is an act of ultimate self-respect. You do not owe your future to people who only value you when you are useful. Real family shows up without a scorecard, and they love you for your soul, not your social standing. I spent 27 years waiting for a seat at their table, only to realize I was always meant to build my own. If this story reminded you that your worth is non-negotiable, hit the like button and share this with someone who needs a reminder that it is okay to choose themselves. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories of justice and resilience. Because sometimes, the quietest people at the table are the ones with the brightest light to share.